Morning and welcome to another recruitment discussion with the Jump Advisory. Say, Mr. Jacobs has just made it. He's just through from the kitchen and mate, there he must have been making himself a brew. Always punctual as ever. We've constantly getting asked about the changes in the marketplace, and with the advent of social media, how do we influence our core marketplace and what's going on? If we start to think about LinkedIn and Facebook, they are now the two biggest job boards in the world. More people get placed via LinkedIn and Facebook than any of the job boards across the whole globe. So we've got to start to think about how we influence our marketplace. So one of the biggest changes is how we use these social tools to influence the candidate market and the client market. I must have upset Heather, she's just run away as well.
Still here.
There's so many stats on this that, I thought I'm not even going to bring stats out because lots are true, lots are untrue, lots I couldn't verify, etc., etc. But what's for certain is that if you influence your market, you can be seen as a trusted advisor to both your candidates and your clients, which then makes your candidate and client acquisition and attraction a whole lot easier. But influencing a market isn't easy. In fact, it's not easy at all. So today we're going to talk about the simplicity of starting that journey as if you were a new recruiter to help bridge the gap from being a nobody to being a somebody in the recruitment market, and then look at ways that potentially more experienced recruiters can influence themselves or influence their marketplace by using social media. This week I've got Heather and Paul with me. Dave is away on holiday, as is Paul Sharpe away on holiday as well. So it seems everyone's getting a holiday bar us three. We seem to be the
hard workers.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly.
The constant as ever. So let's kick off, because I think it's quite a juicy topic. There's an awful lot to sort of discuss and sort of get stuck into. So let's kick off with the first question. When we talk about influencing a marketplace, what, in your opinion, does that actually mean?
Okay, so if we look at this from the perspective of what we're called, recruitment consultants, let's consider what the word consultant means. It means an expert. It means being a teacher, passing on knowledge to others. So if we just take it from its basic source, what does this really mean? What does it mean to be an influencer? Well, it certainly means that you need to understand your particular area of recruitment extremely well. And I think if you are considering that definition, you need to be seen as somebody who knows more than the person that you're advising. In other words, to be an influencer is all about having a high level of knowledge about your particular type of business, your particular sector, your particular form of recruitment. And we're going to talk about how you acquire that, but it is most definitely not about just sending CVs willy-nilly. This is really making a commitment when you start out in recruitment and on an ongoing basis to become the expert in your field, so that people who work in your area regard you as that expert and come to you before they go elsewhere. So it's about separation. It certainly will talk about brand separation, but it's also very much about the me or the you brand. It's about putting yourself in a place where unquestionably, when it comes to knowing your market, you're the person to come to. So it's about studying your subject matter.
And I think it splits into two sides, Paul. So I totally agree with what you're saying. I think we are, as recruitment consultants, and should be, influencers in recruitment. So we totally get recruitment, and we totally get recruitment in the context of the client. But to be a really powerful influencer, we also have to demonstrate that we understand our clients' work, business, context, market, issues, problems, concerns. And so we are talking about more than recruitment to our clients.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think that if you look at recruitment per se, and we've got plenty of experience in recruitment, I would say unquestionably being an influencer is, in part, we were talking about this just before we started, in part it's being a bit of a psychologist. It's about understanding the people you work with, the person, the human being, and being able to provide concise, well thought through, well reasoned advice that helps to guide that person, that you are positioning yourself as somebody who has that individual's best interests at heart, and you are providing very wise counsel to that individual, not just about the subject matter, about the particular form of recruitment you're involved in, but about what's right for that human being, both whether they're a client or a candidate.
So let's stir the pot a little bit on that, because I think you're right in what you're saying, but this is where the old world and the new world start to collide, and it starts to collide quite heavily. In the old world, certainly when I was recruiting and you were recruiting, Paul, we had to create our circle of influence, and we had to speak to clients and get them to understand that we were a market leader based on our knowledge, based on the candidates that we put forward, based on understanding their needs, etc. And therefore we could influence that one client. However, with social media now, it's about how do you get out to that marketplace and influence more than just the clients that you're speaking to make it a lot easier to open up and create a marketplace and be seen as the key person of influence in your marketplace. And there's a big difference from being that recruiter that's sort of hidden away, but you're doing a really good job, to being one that's been seen as an influencer in the marketplace and how you can drive that marketplace. So I think there's a big change that's happened from, the 70s, 80s, 90s, when the 2000s started to kick off, and when LinkedIn started to kick off in sort of like the mid to late 2000s, there was a huge change in the way that people were seen. And I always sort of look this in, I remember sort of going through this sort of process myself, that if you walked into a pub and said, right, okay, tell me in the pub who's a candidate and who's a client, you can't, because they're just people. Then tell me in the pub who's looking for a job. You can't. You've got to go away and speak to all of them. So it's how do you influence all of those people? So if you're just advertising jobs, then what you're doing is you're alienating probably 80% of the marketplace. So to influence the marketplace, what you're talking about, Paul, is using your knowledge that you have and actually pushing that across into the marketplace so your clients and your candidates start to see you as an expert. And it's then how you take that from being seen as an expert to becoming an influencer in what they're doing. So if we start to look at recruitment as a whole, we've got to think there's a big change, and lots of recruiters are still experts in what they're doing, but aren't influencing the marketplace because they're not actually out there working in the marketplace and working on how they can influence that marketplace. So here's the question. If you were a new recruiter, where would you start to influence your marketplace?
Interesting question. And can I put a slight perspective on this? Before we went live, I was watching a Harvard Business Review video about this topic. And one of the things that they were saying in this, and it just feels really true to me, is that you've got to understand, and they defined it as, what is the job to be done? So you need to understand the perspective of both your markets. So you have a market for clients and you have a market for candidates. And you need to understand what they want to know, not what you want to tell them.
Correct.
And so if I was a recruiter, I would say, where do you start? Start by understanding what your audience are interested in. What's the job to do? What's the problem to solve? What's the information that's interesting? In your pub scenario, who wants to know about this? What do they want to know? And I think it's really important. Sometimes, I think we've said this before, clients and candidates are the same population. So your candidates become your clients become your candidates. But they want different things from a recruitment consultant. The job to be done for each of them is different, and we have to understand that perspective.
I completely agree with that. And I think that, I think a lot of what we do as influencers is, and I'm always saying that time spent with clients, whether that's virtually as we do right now, or whether that is face-to-face, which is always preferable, is time very well spent. Because for me, it's about anticipating what is going to be required. We spend most of our time in recruitment reacting to situations. I would think that most recruitment professionals spend 90% of their day, or indeed time in general, reacting. And yet, really, we need to be in front of clients, anticipating what their needs may be, so that we can be proactive about the methods in which we provide the support and direction that we should be giving. So really, to be able to be an influencer, if you think of key influencers outside of our industry, sometimes they call themselves visionaries or some other sort of fluffy title, but actually what they're really doing, I nearly said something else there, didn't I?
Yeah.
Whatever, it was fluffy title. Yeah. So whatever they're thinking, you can be sure that what they're doing is looking into the future. They're considering where a market is going, what is around the corner, what's likely to be happening, and they're advising people on that premise. We do the same thing. We should be doing the same thing. We should be in front of clients on a regular basis, trying to identify what's going to be happening for them in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and making plans and providing solutions. So, influencing is absolutely, we're all capable of influencing if we can anticipate what is likely to be coming in our direction in the future. And the future, by definition, in our world is 3 months, 6 months, worst off a year. You can influence it because you can start to put plans in place. You can start to consider solutions, methods of dealing with your clients or candidates' issues or challenges. Yet most of the time we spend time in our industry reacting, waiting for the phone call or the email that gives us the starter gun and off we sprint. And so I think there is a difference in stance. If you want to be an influencer rather than a reactionary, then it all comes down to being able to plan for the future.
So it's interesting when we start to think about where would you start as an influencer. And what you talked about earlier on, Paul, was about understanding your marketplace. What Heather was talking about is understanding your clients and your candidates' needs. And yet, when I look on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc., 90% of the recruitment agencies, it is job, how to pass a job, how to pass an interview, how to write a CV, job, then another job, and then how to write a CV again. And what we're not actually doing is telling them about their marketplace, tell them about the things that they are interested in, telling them about the things that they want to know and want to hear. They don't want to know about recruitment, and that's the bit that we've got to get over ourselves about. They don't want to know about recruitment. They want to know about what's happening in their marketplace. So once we start to understand that, and we can then start to feed them with things that they like to hear and like to see, guess what? They start to look out more for that information, more info what's going on. So if you think about the biggest thing that people are talking about at the moment outside of coronavirus itself and the Afghan war, which is what everyone seems to be talking about at the moment, still what people are talking about is the job recovery. But what they're talking about is how many candidates are available, what's available, etc. But what they're talking about is how the market is recovering in generic terms rather than individual terms. So whether you're a candidate or a client, that's something that's really interesting. It's interesting when we start talk about influencing a marketplace. I always start to think about how I could influence what people are generally interested in. It was interesting when I was sort of running recruitment teams and we started to do this. As soon as Apple launched a new product, we'd put a post out about Apple launching a new product. Guess what? We got thousands and thousands of people interacting with that post because everyone was interested in what's going on with that new piece of tech kit that everyone uses, the phone. And so it's not just about influencing in that way, because in the old days, Paul, what we would do is we'd ring one client and we'd speak to the client and we'd pass our knowledge on and we'd influence one client at a time. What we're talking about is the opportunity of influencing infinite amounts of clients at one time, which may drive business towards you. If you start to read what's going on, how many agencies are now saying we no longer do business development because our marketing is bringing all our leads straight to us and we just have to convert those leads. So all they're doing is influencing a marketplace by what they're pushing out, and what those clients are pushing out is not job. They're pushing things out that clients and candidates want to see and hear, and clients are coming to them and talking to them. So is it a new way of cold calling by bringing clients in to that sales funnel in an easier fashion than what ours was just calling one at a time?
Yeah.
So you can influence lots of people. So to me, where I would start is I would start with knowledge, but then I would start with looking at, say, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc., building my network within that marketplace to ensure that when I am pushing things out to influence, the right people are seeing it.
Look, I think, the world has changed a great deal from when we started in recruitment. Of course, you're making a reference to social media. What we know about social media is that if you're sending out generic posts, you're going to miss an awful lot of people. And to Heather's point earlier, people react to posts, particularly on social media, if it's relevant to them. It's no point in sending out one particular post thinking that every one of your contacts is going to find that interesting. That's just simply not the case. Proper marketing is about looking at your followers, if you like, and understanding who fits where, and sending out messaging that's customized for them. So you are looking at carving out your contacts, your followers, and sending them something that may be of key interest to that individual, rather than something generic. In fact, I think when we receive these generic posts, we find it quite irritating. I do. I've seen an awful lot of stuff sent to me that is of absolutely no interest to me whatsoever. I'll stop and read something that I think is relevant to me and my profession, that I think has given me something, some knowledge, some information that I can use, even regurgitate. But the fact is that I can find it intensely irritating to just be spammed by posts that is of no relevance to me. So influencing is very much more than just sending out messaging. It's about understanding your audience and making sure that what you're sending out or giving to people is relevant to them, which is Heather's point. And I think on that premise, it requires a great deal of work. We spent time, Dave and I, with a client yesterday talking about marketing as an overall concept. We were talking very much about this particular subject matter, making sure that the marketing is customized to the specific audience, rather than just sending out regular posts that have no interest to 70% of the people you're sending it to.
So I think there's a cross, isn't there, between sending that information about the marketplace, information that's really pointed at the people that you are talking to or trying to talk to, rather than generic. But there has to be a small amount of generic marketing in there. But there's also the flip side of that, is that, when you start to market, what you are doing is there's two brands, isn't there? There's your personal brand and there's your business brand. And when you start to market both sides, it's about humanizing you as a person and then getting that connection with people from there. So it's two ways of looking at that marketing point of view, is that you can send out all of the stuff that we're talking about, but you're still not humanizing it. So it's about how you humanize it as you. So what that marketing is actually designed to do is provoke conversation, provoke emotion, provoke comments. So what it is all about is it's asking the question, it's asking the understanding around the certain topics. And I was, again, like you, Paul, I was with a client yesterday, we were talking about pushing things out. And once you start to push into that marketplace, they want to see you as a human being. They want to understand you as a human being. And we've talked, numerous times about some of the posts that we put out, and some of the biggest posts and hits that we've had have been the posts that we put out singular. If you look at your post, Paul, about you playing the guitar, posts about going camping and things like that.
Don't you dare get that guitar out.
I've got it here, I have.
Jeez. Don't worry, folks, I will mute him if he brings it out. But what we're talking about when we look at these type of things, though, is that we're humanizing ourselves, and therefore people can relate to us, and therefore they'll relate more to the other posts that we start to post out. So there has to be a real blended approach when we start to influence, because that's how we actually influence a marketplace. So let's flip into the bigger question, which is, why is a recruiter's personal brand potentially bigger and more influential than the corporate brand?
Okay, so look, I mean, it's the oldest cliche in the book, but people buy people, and or as you will add to that, Howard, people buy people whom they like, and obviously it makes a massive difference as an employee to work for a brand that's well regarded, that has credibility, that's respected. Clearly, that makes a massive difference when you're working for a company that the market understands, that knows. Then it opens doors. And it says something about you as an individual that you're working for that brand. But once you start to have that connection with a client or a candidate, it comes down to their view of you as a human being. It almost matters not what's above the door any longer. It's about how you represent that business on a one-on-one basis. And that's where you can be found out if you don't know your subject matter, if you are unaware of your market, if you are, and this is obviously a case in point for brand new people, if you are lacking in knowledge and experience, you can be found out pretty fast. So it's truly important, not just when you're new into our industry, and there's an awful lot of brand new people coming into our industry at this moment who need a tremendous amount of help and support in their early months. But I think, and we've said this before, but I've been saying it to a few clients recently, at the heart of every business should be a learning culture. It isn't just about making sure that brand new people are onboarded correctly and trained and supported and given the opportunity to move forward and develop into experts, but it's absolutely about making sure that it's a lifelong learning experience, that no matter how long you've been working in an organization, the business is investing in you, in making certain that you're provided with support, training, coaching, whether that's internal or external, and exposed to experts in your particular field, whether that's about experts within recruitment who can teach you to be better at your profession, or whether you're exposed to people in your market who will be able to provide you with knowledge and information about your specific sector and what's going on in it. So right in the heart of all this has got to be a commitment from the owners of businesses that if people work for them, they will help them throughout their entire lifespan, their career span with that business, become experts, become influencers. It's not something you do just when they start.
So I think
Interesting. Sorry, Howard,
no, you go, Heather. I will.
Well, I just think it's really. I think it's a really interesting question, because I think the recruiter brand and the corporate brand have to work in concert, and I think that's what you're talking about, Paul, isn't it? They have to be congruent. So it's no different to what we talked about with candidate attraction over the last couple of weeks with EVP. And then the experience of when you come, you've got, when you hire a recruiter, you want what they actually find when they come and work for you to be, genuine and truthful. This is exactly the same. So the corporate brand creates an expectation, and the recruiter brand has to be congruent with that, has to complement that,
yes.
And it has to deliver on it. So, no recruiter brand is ever going to be as big as Adecco, Hayes, those big, it's never going to be the case. But in smaller businesses, clearly it's possible for the recruiter brand to be bigger. But that's only about bringing people in. It's only about that initial conversation, isn't it? In the same way that people leave managers, not organizations, clients want to work with individuals who understand the market, who give them value, and that it's congruent with the overall brand. So I think the two work really closely, hand in hand with each other.
Yes.
And I think LinkedIn in particular is moving more towards recruiter individual brands, because of what Paul said. People want to buy from people. They don't want the corporate messaging. They want truth, and they want personal, individual, people buy from people. So I think it's a really interesting debate. It's also a real challenge, because if your recruiter's brand is bigger than your corporate brand and you're the leader of a smaller organization, what do you do if your recruiter leaves? And that's a whole nother debate, and we can do a whole webinar. On that, and how you embed client relationships in your organization so they aren't dependent on one individual recruiter's brand.
And I think sorry, Hal, I'll just to completely top and tail something Heather said. I think firstly, passion sells. We know that. If you're passionate about what you talk about, that's important, but it has to be authentic. There's no point in saying we specialize in X, Y, and Z, or I'm an expert in X, Y, and Z, if it's easy to determine that the amount of information or knowledge or expertise is superficial. It has to be authentic. You have to, as you said, Heather, if you say you're something, then be that something. And that takes a great deal of commitment from the business and the individuals, not only to understand their subject matter, but to stay on top of that subject matter. It's, as I said a moment ago, it's an ongoing process. You're never an expert and that's the end of it. You're always in the position of learning and retraining. And there's never a point at which any of us can ever say, that's it, I've done it, I know what I'm doing. The truth is, we're all of us in this position of constantly learning. And in particular, when you think of some of the sectors in recruitment where it's so dynamic and there's so much change consistently occurring, you've really got to work very hard to remain an expert and influencer in your market.
So I agree, and I'm going to also disagree.
You're going to stir the pot again, are you?
Go on then.
Is this about a pub again?
No.
It's not about your guitar either.
It's not about a pub, we're not going to guitars. If we start to think about what we're doing, and we start to think about pushing ourselves out as a personal brand into the marketplace, it's about who you are influencing. So you're influencing your clients and you're influencing your candidates, and it's how you influence them. So you need your corporate brand to be sat beside you, because guess what? As soon as they Google you, they'll Google your corporate brand. So there needs to be an absolute synergy between there. And that's all about the values and the mission statement, which you guys were talking about from there. But I'm a huge believer in that. It doesn't matter whether you're a deco, your personal brand in your niche market is far more powerful than the corporate brand. So if you push your personal brand properly and you work with your clients properly, then, and your candidates properly, what you'll find is that you are subliminally, constantly selling to your clients. Even though the post that we're sending out shouldn't be about selling, it should be about what the clients want to hear and the candidates want to hear. But what you're doing is subliminally pushing yourself in front of that client every single day, every single time. There's a reason why Coke, Wrigley's, all the big players are constantly advertising, because they are constantly telling you that we are here, we are here, we are here. And when we are selling humans, as we are, we have to be telling our clients that we are here constantly, but we have to be whetting their appetite with certain things to give them the reasons why they want to talk to us. So our personal brand will become far bigger than the corporate brand and more powerful. And we go back to the Henry Ford conversation last week. What happens if we train them and they leave? Well, what happens if we train them and they stay? So if they leave, they leave. But what we have to do is have both sides of the coin. So if you have a good business brand, that will get you through the door. The personal brand will open all the doors in the corridor as you go through that company. And that's what we've got to start to think about as an influencer, that we're trying to influence people, not a brand. So we are trying to influence people to come and talk to us, so we can then convert them into a potential sale, whether it be a client or whether it be a candidate. That is what it's all about. It's about driving people into that channel that you can convert into a conversation. And that is a personal thing, not a brand. People don't.
Interesting anecdote there, because Wrigley's and Coke, they advertise their brand. They never advertise the corner shop that sells them. But yes, the corner shop advertises itself. And so when you go into it, you will buy the brand that you recognize because you've seen the brand.
Yeah.
And that is that understanding the interrelationship between the personal brand and the corporate brand is really, really important. I just think they're as important as each other.
I totally agree. And Howard, I was about to say, I think if you want to be that influencer that we're discussing, if you want to have that constant level of training and coaching and understanding your market, perhaps the best way to achieve that is to be an absolutely outstanding networker, meaning that you are forever reaching out and speaking to the key influencers in your market. In other words, you're talking to a huge range of clients on a constant basis. I've already said face-to-face, obviously, and you are consistently talking to a huge range of candidates, because that constant communication with people, as Heather says, hard to decide whether there are separate candidates and clients, they are the same people. So that constant level of communication, whether that's verbal or whether that is through other media, other methods, is essential for you to become that industry expert. Networking is the key.
So if we talk about that, and there's a lady on actually attending today that is an unbelievable networker. And what we're talking about, Paul, in our day, we were influencing one client at a time with one phone call. She's arranging roundtable meetings, corporate meetings, bringing experts in to talk to people. So what she's seen is being the influencer, even though she's not the expert in a certain topic, because she's bringing that influencer in. And if they've got 10, 15, 20, 30 people in the room, then you're influencing all of those people within that room. So you're subliminally selling to all of those 30 people that you are the key person to go to for this type of information, because you've brought that information to them. So influencing your clients, to me, is really important, and how you influence your clients. Because yes, at the moment, we're in a candidate-rich marketplace, and we've got to drive candidates into our clients, but we still need clients to buy those candidates. So how we influence the buyer is really important. And that is not about selling. It's about what can we do for them? How can we help them become better at their job? And that's what this young lady is doing. She's taking certain aspects of what the problems are in the marketplace, bringing in a subject matter expert to disseminate that information out to her clients. And therefore, de facto, she becomes the influencer within that marketplace.
Yes.
And that becomes, whether you're doing that physically, whether you're doing that online, whether you're doing that, what have you. But what that means is, behind that, you have to be constantly marketing yourself and your brand as that key influencer within the marketplace. If you think of what we're doing here today, our webinars, this is our 51st webinar, I think. Wow. It is, as Jump. Okay, we are a year old in a week's time. So a week and a half's time, we're a year old. So it must be our 50 or 51st webinar.
Hooray for us.
And you think we have been subliminally selling to clients every single week. We then back that up with posts and conversations and what have you. And part of influencing is giving away lots and lots and lots of information and lots of advice for free, which help your clients get on with their daily activities in an easier fashion. So when they actually need you, they think of you. And that, to me, is when we start to talk about how we influence clients. That is what it talks about. So the question then is, why is it important to be seen to be connected with other influencers in your marketplace in order to become a true, top of the tree influencer?
I think it comes down to a word that's been, we talk about it a lot, but it's essential, and that is trust. So if you are that, if you like, that hub where around which everything else revolves, clients, candidates, and you are, as you've well stated, you are the person that is introducing, and you're the person that is advising and providing information. Ultimately, you develop a level of trust. Trust, obviously, in our industry goes deeper than that, because it's not just about passing on accurate information, but it's also about doing what you said you would do, and with bells and whistles. So it's making sure that you're consistently at the heart of everything else, thinking that whatever advice you're giving has to be accurate. It has to be something that people will not only take on board, but will use, and will use with the knowledge that it's come from a trusted source. And that's very important, because giving out information and knowledge is okay. But if it turns out that what you're providing is inaccurate or badly considered, then that's going to backfire. So making sure that you are giving advice from a trusted source, that you are viewed as the trusted source in your market, that what you're saying is true, it's accurate, it's well researched, it's factual, is very, very important. I always think that if you act as a trusted advisor, whether it's work we do or whether you are a recruitment professional, if you're a trusted advisor, make sure that the information you're given is well grounded, is well considered, is accurate, because when you're trusted, people act on your advice. And that's a heavy burden. If you're providing people with information, you're giving them guidance, and they're going to listen to you and act upon your guidance, be very sure you're passing on accurate information. Because if you don't, it will come back and bite you very hard. So it's not something any of us take lightly. I take my responsibilities very, very strongly, as you guys do. And I think that applies in recruitment circles. Don't give out advice, don't give out information unless you are very sure that what you're saying is well considered, well grounded, is true, because people will listen and they will act upon your advice. So trust is a very important word here, I think.
I couldn't agree with you more, Paul. Absolutely. So being connected and introducing influencers to your client and being that source of knowledge, hugely important in becoming an influencer. But once you lose that trust by making the wrong connections or associating inappropriately, it's very hard to come back from that. So being very sure about organizations you partner with and organizations you put in front of your clients to share information, hugely important.
And we talk often about in these webinars, 51 of them apparently, it's amazing. We talk about the fact that we're in a position now in the market where and it sounds arrogant, but I know speaking to my clients, they feel the same way. You can choose between the good pound and the bad pound. Which clients are we going to work with, and which clients would we rather not work with based on a whole range of factors? And I always feel that when you're in recruitment and you're introducing candidates, if you take your responsibilities very seriously as far as candidates are concerned, then you want to be clear that the companies you're introducing them to are companies you're comfortable working with. Because if you want to be an influencer, somebody that is judged to have the right connections, the right network, then you want, as Heather says, to make sure that when you're making those introductions, you're taking care of your people, you're taking care of your clients, you're taking care of your candidates. You do not want to be providing networking opportunities or connections to people based upon organizations or candidates that you have very limited faith in. That isn't going to do you a great deal of good in the long run.
But it's I suppose it's bigger than that. Why is it important to be connected or be influencers in the marketplace? It's using that influence, but it's then using influence of the other people within that marketplace. And before I came on the call, I was working with a client, and we were talking about certain things that we'd put in process 2 or 3 weeks ago, and she'd been trying to break the door down of a client for about 12 months and was really, really struggling. And we found, and after a couple of minutes conversation, that one of her key clients was highly linked in with the client that she was trying to call. And so I said, use your influence on your client to talk to the client you want to get into to influence the conversation that you want to have with that client. She's now working 3 huge retained jobs for her new client because the person that she had influenced in the initial place has now influenced a second person based on that. When we talked about how she'd found that client initially, she'd found that client via doing various stuff on LinkedIn, etc. That client had come to talk to her. She then influenced that client. Her service then spoke for itself, and then it was using that. Now, that's what we were doing old school, Paul, wasn't it? We were going out and speaking to clients and saying, do you know XYZ client? Can you introduce me? Yeah. And we were getting introductions. The networking events at that time were trade shows that you'd rock up to a trade show in your certain marketplace and you'd press the flesh at the trade show so you could get connections from there. Today, it's so much easier with the likes of social media that you can get that. So it's really important to be seen, to be connected with other people who are influential in your marketplace, because they can connect you to other people and they can drive that from there. So it's always interesting when, I start to review consultants, and I used to start to ask them about what they're doing on LinkedIn and where they were going on LinkedIn, and saying, right, here's your top 5 clients. I've looked at your LinkedIn profile. You're not connected to any of your clients. You're not connected to people within your client base or on your client base. Why not? Oh, they already know me. They're already working with me. But it's about, how that collective together can be seen, and this is the bit that I've always talked about on recruitment websites. We talk about that corporate brand. How many recruitment websites refuse point blank to put really high influencing clients branding on their website to say they're working with them because they're scared that other agencies will see that and pinch them? Well, if your relationship is that poor, then fine, you shouldn't be putting it on. But if you're putting it on, guess what? You're telling clients and other clients that you are a serious player in the marketplace and you have a huge amount of influence in the marketplace. And that is what we seem to forget, that corporate and that personal product branding is absolutely important. So being seen to be connected is hugely important. So last question is, how do you see these influencers? How do we get them to increase our brand impact if we are connected with other people? How do we get them to increase our brand impact?
So, I think we're fortunate. You've made a point earlier, Howard, that, from the early days of recruitment, when we started back, as I often say, with gas lamps and horse-drawn carriages, but, we now have a huge range of methods to increase our level of influence in a market, to increase our network. I don't need to list them, you guys know them, and there are more and more methods coming in our direction very soon, I'm sure. The thing here for me is making sure that when we recruit, when we bring people into our business, and when we continue to develop those people, and I mentioned earlier about, the heart of everything needs to be an L&D culture. But I also think that it's really important that people that work in our industry and that want to come into our industry understand it's not just about placing people in jobs. I think we do ourselves such a disservice when we talk about that, when we see ourselves purely as a business that gets people jobs. And it's a very, very satisfying thing to do, and it's a very important thing to do. But boy, do we do more than that. We do so much more than that. And I think when we bring people into the business, we need to make them very aware during the interview process. We don't just expect them to introduce candidates to clients and vice versa and get people jobs and fill jobs, that we see their role as much deeper than that. And that it's going to take some years for them to move towards a position of being an influencer. But I think that when you bring in the right people into your business and you guide and coach them and you continue to support them and you continue to provide them with opportunities to become experts and you encourage them to network to the degree you mentioned earlier, Howard, then in turn, it has a great and a very positive impact on your brand. And as Heather says, you can't differentiate the people to the brand. They are one. And I think it's something that as a brand, we talk about the brand and we talk about people. I think Heather's right. And it kind of occurs to me, it's the same thing. We're talking about something that's so obviously interlinked that when people meet you in a restaurant or in a bar or wherever, they instantly know you are that company. You are defined by that business and the business is defined by you.
A phrase comes to mind, Paul, that Tim Cook, actually, the CEO of Engage, uses all the time. He says, as recruiters, we should value ourselves and value our service. And it's really important. I sometimes think we do absolutely undervalue the amazing things that we do for our clients and for our candidates, and we don't shout loudly enough. And so we allow the poor service or the poor view of recruitment to be what's talked about, and not actually the amazing things that we do for our clients and our candidates, and we should hold on to that.
Can I throw in a challenge to people out there just on this point? But it's an interesting. I'm just going to say it quickly before we finish. There's a person I know who I grew up with. I mean, I grew up 4 doors down from her. We were 7 years old when I moved into the area, and we went to junior school together. And years ago, when I was at the Alfred Marks Bureau, she used to work for the Times newspaper in Gray's Inn Road. She was being made redundant, and I introduced her to the Alfred Marks Bureau. That shows you how many years ago. She contacted me the other day to say she's coming up for a 40th anniversary at Echo. 40 years. Now, my challenge is, has anybody ever made a placement that exceeds 40 years? Because I may be sitting here with a world record. So we talk about influence, right? And she actually said in the bottom of her note, bless her, Carol, she said, talk about life changing. I mean, in other words, what I did for her at that point, getting her a job. 40 years now.
Amazing.
So I'm going to set the
Amazing.
challenge out there, people. Anybody play
So-
somebody that's lasted longer than 40 years? We're talking about influence. Can anyone
It's not
beat
possible, Paul. None of us are that old.
I was just going to say, Uncle Jobs, we're not all that old, Uncle Jobs.
Deborah's saying not old enough. Sorry, fair enough. But I think I hold the world record then. I'm going to be interested to know if anybody in the world has played somebody that's lasted
I will
longer
get
than
the Guinness
40
Book of Records to come over,
years.
Paul, and verify that
I'm
and
maybe
see
sitting
what they
here
say.
on that record. You never know.
What we've got to think about, what we've just said there, though, is really important. It's about corporate and personal brand, and about how those two synergies impact the marketplace. And you can have a very, very good personal brand, but if your corporate brand's poor, then it will tarnish your personal brand, and vice versa. So it is about keeping the values really high and living around those values, because that is what people will buy. They'll buy the value, they'll buy your mission. We talk a lot about that mission statement. So if they can see that you're corporately aligned to your company values and vice versa, then we start to have a bigger impact on brands. And the brand is what it's all about, whether it be personal or whether it be a corporate brand. Because at the end of the day, it's about selling and moving forward on that sort of front.
Oh my God, have you seen these comments now? Thank you, Mr. Lapthorne. I appreciate it.
I've only started to recruit with an advert. Trade CV.
What have I started?
Very good.
Colin,
very good.
I'm sure that Mr. Jacobs probably was chasing the mammoth, but the mammoth had only just come onto the planet at that stage as well.
You're saying an old fossil, I think.
Correct. So what we've got to think about is what we talked about today is not about a 5-6 year seasoned recruiter, but it could be if you're not already doing the right things to start and influencing the market. This is if you are new into the marketplace, what you should be doing. So your brand should be identical to your, if I looked at your LinkedIn profile, it should be identical to the website profile, etc. But what you say is you, and it's your personal brand. And if it's aligned to the values and the mission of the company, then that is exactly where we want to be, because we align them both. And what we've got to say is that without this at the moment, and it's interesting that I remember sort of starting this sort of journey, and someone said, can you get a ROI on building your brand? I said, you can, but the biggest ROI you get is when you pick up the phone and you call a candidate or a client and they go, I've seen all your stuff all over LinkedIn, all over Twitter, all over Facebook, and they already know who you are before you have a conversation with them. That's when you know you're starting to really influence and change the marketplace, because they know who you are.
Correct. Yeah, and it's a lifelong level of commitment. You've got to keep on doing it. You can't just think you're going to become an expert in your market by playing at it. It's got to be something you're passionate about. So
as we close off this week, I'm going to ask a question to the audience. We always ask about topics that you want to hear us talk about, and someone said, I hope you're going to carry on doing these. Of course we're going to carry on doing these. So next week we've discussed this and said we were unsure whether it's the right topic or not, but it sort of links nicely into what we're talking about now. The topic would be, is cold calling dead? And if you think that that's a topic, then is that something that we should be discussing? Or is that something that you guys aren't really interested in? If so, we will start to look at other topics. But to me, that's a great call. Is cold calling dead? Because this is what we're talking about now, how we market ourselves. Cold calling as a marketing approach, as is what we've talked about today, influencing the marketplace. So if you think cold calling is dead, if you just drop a little note in the thing, that'd be great. If not, thank you very much. It's been a great session as always. Paul and Heather, thanks for your input. I'm sure, Paul, you'll be dusting off that prehistoric dust from your shoulders on that award that you got from the first recruitment agency ever.
I'm very proud of that.
We love your anecdotes, Paul.
I'm very proud of that. 40 years, can you believe
that? Is an astonishing achievement.
I know,
genuinely.
Isn't that amazing?
It was interesting, Paul. You dropped me a line yesterday saying that about Mr. Rolling Stones, who had fortunately passed away.
Charlie, bless him.
Charlie it's 40 years ago since they played in Roundy Park. When I saw them, wow. That's what really made me. It's 40 years ago since they played in Rounded Park. Ladies and gents, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you all next week. We will come out with a topic that we think will rivet you as always. Hopefully the holiday seasons that have gone, because obviously the numbers have dropped a little bit with the holiday season, so we'll be back to full power next week. Have a super week, and we'll see you all very soon.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.